The imposing mansion stood solitary at the top of the hill, its dark windows reflecting the grey sky. For 20 long years that majestic building remained silent, as if time itself had stopped within its walls. It was there that Eric, a man once vibrant and full of life, now lived his days in absolute seclusion. Eric was not an ordinary man. At 55 years old, he carried the weight of a fortune built with determination and shrewdness in business. His face, marked by deep wrinkles, told the story of someone who had seen and lived much more than most. The eyes, once bright, now seemed dull, as if an invisible curtain had been drawn over them. Every day followed the same monotonous routine. Eric would wake up early, dress impeccably in custom-made suits, even if no one besides himself would see them. He took his breakfast alone in the immense dining room, the only sound being the clinking of the spoon against the fine porcelain cup. Then he would lock himself in his office, immersing himself in endless piles of documents and reports. The only human contact Eric allowed was the daily visit of his assistant, a discreet and efficient man who brought more papers and carried away precise instructions about the business. There were no conversations beyond the strictly necessary. There were no smiles, no human warmth. The mansion, although impeccably maintained by a team working behind the scenes, seemed cold and lifeless. The long hallways echoed with emptiness. The furniture covered with white sheets resembled silent ghosts of a life that no longer existed. There was no television, no radio, no music. Silence was Eric's only constant companion. It was in this setting that Jenna arrived, bringing with her an energy that had not penetrated those walls for a long time. At 42 years old, Jenna was the opposite of everything the mansion represented. Her brown eyes shone with contagious joy, and her easy smile seemed to light up the spaces she walked through. Hired as the new cleaner, Jenna was not intimidated by the gloomy atmosphere of the place. In the first days, she watched attentively the routine of the house, trying to understand the habits of the mysterious owner she barely saw. She noticed how meals were always served at the same times, how the curtains remained closed most of the time, how the silence was almost palpable. But Jenna was not the type to be content with just watching. Her natural curiosity drove her to want to know more, to understand what lay behind that facade of coldness and isolation. As she cleaned the rooms, she hummed softly, as if trying to bring a little life to such a static place. It was on a particularly grey afternoon that fate decided to intervene. Jenna was cleaning the second floor when she noticed a door she had never seen open before. Intrigued, she approached cautiously. The latch yielded easily under her touch, and she found herself entering a room that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Dust danced in the air, illuminated by the rays of sunlight that managed to penetrate through the gaps in the heavy curtains. Old furniture was covered by yellowed sheets, creating ghostly shapes in the shadows. But it was what was at the center of the room that immediately captured Jenna's attention. There, majestic and imposing, was a grand piano. Even covered by a thin layer of dust, it was impossible not to notice its beauty. Jenna approached as if hypnotized. Her fingers gently glided over the smooth surface, leaving a trail in the accumulated dust. It was then that she noticed beside the piano a sheet music yellowed by time. Carefully, she took the pages in her hands, reading the title written in elegant handwriting. Song for Our Happy Days. Something in those words touched Jenna's heart deeply. Without a second thought, she sat down on the piano bench. Her fingers rested gently on the keys, hesitant at first. She closed her eyes, recalling the old piano lessons she had taken during childhood. And then, as if guided by a force greater than herself, she began to play. The initial notes sounded hesitant, breaking the silence of 2 decades, but soon the melody gained strength, filling the room and spreading through the house like ripples in a tranquil lake. It was a sweet song, with hints of melancholy, speaking of love, hope, and dreams. Jenna let herself be carried away by the music, her eyes closed, absorbing every note. That was why she did not immediately notice the figure that appeared at the door, eyes wide in a mixture of shock and fury. "Stop!" Eric's shout cut through the air like a sharp blade, making Jenna jump from her seat, startled. There, standing at the door, was the man she had barely seen in the past few days. However, this was not the cold and controlled businessman she expected to see. Eric's face was pale, twisted in an expression of such deep pain that it seemed almost physical. His eyes, once dull, now glistened with unshed tears. "Get out of here, now," he ordered, his voice trembling slightly. Jenna, still in shock, just nodded and quickly left the room, passing by Eric without daring to look into his eyes. The sound of the door being locked behind her echoed down the hallway, seeming to seal that place in time once again. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion grew even heavier. Eric isolated himself further, refusing even to leave his room for meals. Jenna continued her work, but now with a weight in her heart. She knew she had touched something deep, a wound that seemingly had never healed. But Jenna was not the type to give up easily. As she carried out her tasks, she observed. She noticed the small details. How Eric's hands trembled slightly when he picked up his coffee cup. How his eyes sometimes wandered into the void. How he seemed to carry an invisible weight on his shoulders. It was during one of these observations that Jenna noticed something she had never seen before. In a discreet corner of Eric's office, partially hidden by a heavy curtain, there was a photograph. It was the only personal image in the entire house. Taking advantage of a moment when Eric was not in the room, Jenna approached to take a closer look. The photo showed a young, smiling couple. The man was unmistakably Eric, but a very different Eric from the one she knew. His eyes sparkled with happiness, and his smile was wide and genuine. Beside him, a beautiful dark-haired woman smiled at the camera, a hand resting affectionately on her slightly rounded belly. It was at that moment that the pieces began to fit together in Jenna's mind. The music on the piano, the hidden photograph, Eric's isolation. Everything pointed to a story of profound loss. Determined to understand better, Jenna began to discreetly ask questions to Eric's assistant during her daily visits. Gradually, the tragic story was revealed. Years ago, Eric was a different man. Married and about to become a father, he lived a life full of love. His wife, a talented pianist, had composed that melody especially to celebrate the arrival of the baby. But fate had other plans. On a business trip that Eric considered crucial for his career, he received the news that would change his life forever. His wife had gone into premature labor. Complications arose, and when Eric finally managed to reach the hospital, it was too late. Both his wife and the baby had not survived. Guilt consumed him. Eric blamed himself for not being present, for prioritizing work at such a crucial moment. The weight of this guilt led him to isolate himself from the world, locking away not only the piano, but also his heart. Armed with this knowledge, Jenna decided she couldn't simply ignore Eric's suffering. Gradually, she began to try to break the ice barrier he had built around himself. It started with small gestures, a warmer "good morning," a gentle smile when their paths crossed. At first, Eric seemed immune to these attempts, but Jenna did not give up. One day, she left a small vase with fresh flowers on Eric's breakfast table. He looked at the flowers for a long time, an indescribable expression on his face. The next day, to Jenna's surprise, the vase was prominently displayed in the living room. Encouraged by this small progress, Jenna continued. She began leaving small positive notes along with the reports that the assistant delivered. Simple phrases like, "Have a great day," or "I hope the sun shines for you today," seemed insignificant. But gradually, she noticed a subtle change in Eric. His shoulders seemed less tense, his gaze less distant. Once, Jenna even caught him giving a slight smile as he read one of her notes. The weeks went by, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere in the mansion began to change. The oppressive silence gave way to a more comfortable quiet. Eric started coming out of his office more often, sometimes even stopping to exchange a few words with Jenna. It was during one of these brief conversations that Jenna finally gathered the courage to bring up the subject she had wanted to discuss for so long. "Mr. Eric," she began hesitantly, I would like to apologize for that day in the piano room." Eric remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on a distant point. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "There is nothing to apologize for, Jenna. You couldn't have known." Encouraged by his response, Jenna continued, "That music, it's beautiful. Your wife must have been a talented pianist." Eric's eyes turned to her, a mixture of surprise and pain in his gaze. "How did you... I saw the photograph in your office," Jenna admitted, blushing slightly. "And I asked some questions. I'm sorry if I crossed any boundaries." To his surprise, Eric wasn't angry. Instead, he let out a long sigh as if a weight was being partially lifted from his shoulders. "She was amazing," he finally said, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Laura. That was her name. She lit up any room she walked into, and her music could touch people's souls." Jenna listened carefully as Eric, for the first time in 2 decades, spoke about his wife. He told her about how they met, the plans they had for the future, and the excitement of discovering they would become parents. And then, with a choked voice, he talked about that fateful day, about the guilt that consumed him, about the decision to isolate himself from the world. "I thought that if I distanced myself from everything that reminded me of her, the pain would lessen," he confessed. "But it only made me feel emptier." Jenna, driven by an impulse, took Eric's hand in hers. "You don't have to carry this weight alone," she said softly. "I'm sure your wife wouldn't want to see you like this, isolated from the world and the music she loved so much." Eric looked at their joined hands, an expression of surprise on his face. For a moment, Jenna feared she had gone too far. But then, to her surprise, he gently squeezed her hand back. Maybe you were right," he murmured. That night, something changed in the mansion. The air seemed lighter, as if a window had been opened after years of being shut. And it was in this atmosphere of change that Jenna made a courageous decision. After finishing her tasks, she headed to the piano room. The door was open. With her heart racing, she opened the door and entered. The room was exactly as she remembered. She sat at the piano and, with trembling fingers, began to play a melody. The notes flowed smoothly, filling the house with music that had not been heard there for a long time. It was then that she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart almost stopped, fearing another outburst of anger. But when the door opened, what she saw left her speechless. Eric was standing in the doorway, silent tears running down his face. But there was no anger in his eyes. Slowly, he approached the piano. Jenna stopped playing, unsure of what to do, but Eric just sat beside her on the bench. With trembling hands, he touched the keys. The first notes came out hesitant, out of tune after so many years without practice. But gradually, as if rediscovering a lost part of himself, Eric began to play. The melody that emerged was the same one Jenna had played, but there was something more. It was as if Eric was pouring all his history, all his pain, and all his love into those notes. Jenna watched, moved, as Eric played. She saw how his shoulders relaxed, like a peace she had never seen before seemed to spread across his face. When the music finally came to an end, a reverent silence hung in the air. Eric lowered his hands, his breathing a bit heavy. Then, to Jenna's surprise, he turned to her with a smile. A genuine smile, the first she had seen since she arrived at that house. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice laden with emotion. In that moment, looking into each other's eyes, Jenna and Eric realized that something had changed between them. It was not just gratitude or friendship. It was something deeper, something neither of them expected to find. There, sitting side by side at the piano that had long symbolized pain and loss, they understood that love could emerge in the most unexpected places, that the past, no matter how painful, does not need to define the future. Eric and Jenna remained in the piano room, talking, laughing, and sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence that now existed between them. The mansion, which for so long had been a place of loneliness and sadness, now seemed to awaken to a new life. The windows were opened, letting a fresh breeze circulate through the rooms. The sound of laughter echoed through the halls, blending with the notes of the piano that was now played daily. Eric gradually began reconnecting with the outside world. With Jenna's help, he started getting more actively involved in daily activities, meeting up with old friends, and visiting his businesses. The sparkle returned to his eyes, and the smile that was once so rare now frequently lit up his face. Jenna, in turn, discovered in Eric not just a millionaire, an employer, but a companion. Someone who valued her for who she was, who appreciated her zest for life and her determination. And so, in that mansion atop the hill, two souls that seemed so different found in each other exactly what they needed. Eric learned that it is possible to honor the past without being bound by it. And Jenna discovered that sometimes love appears when we least expect it, and teaches us that there is always a second chance to be happy. Together they proved that the music of life, no matter how silenced it may sometimes seem, never truly falls silent. You just need to find someone willing to listen and play the melody of a new beginning along with us. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.